into 4 main headings. So concerns raised in submissions can be broken down to removal of the public toilet, removal of the mature trees and vegetation within Field Park, concerns about the building design, or what we know as built form outcome, and parking. So it's probably a good idea to actually look at a response to each of these issues. The removal of the public toilet. The trigger for removal of the public toilet in the planning scheme is a demolition permit required under the heritage overlay. So the only trigger for consideration of the proposal as part of this application is that demolition consent. So the decision guideline for demolition under the heritage overlay talks specifically to whether or not what is being proposed to be demolished is of value or of heritage significance. And in this case, the answer is definitely no. That being said, it's understood that public toilets will be provided in the actual facility. But the other component is that despite the fact that service levels are not really a land use planning consideration, we understand that council are acknowledging that it is something that is going to be considered post this report. So the only component of that public toilet that is being considered as part of the planning report that is being presented tonight is the demolition. So that's public toilet. Removal of the mature trees and vegetation in Field Park. This is another interesting one because the trees are also not protected by the scheme. So they're not protected because they're not native to Victoria. They're also not protected under the heritage overlay. So whilst they contribute to a sense of place associated with Field Park, there's no specific protection or requirement for a permit for their removal in the scheme. Again, that being said, it's obviously important to the people who've put pen to paper and made submissions. So there is a recommendation as part of the permit conditions, should the planning authority wish to follow the recommendation and issue a notice of decision, that the pink flowering gum be retained in Field Park. So concerns about the building design and built form outcome. The scheme talks specifically to materials and finishes and designs that are relevant to residential design and built form outcome in the Queenscliff planning scheme, and specifically in Queenscliff where we have heritage overlays. So we have panel reports and VCAT hearing determinations where it's obvious that to people that the requirement to mimic heritage, or the suggestion that heritage should be mimicked, is part of an assessment of a residential development. In this case, we're not assessing a residential development, we're actually assessing a commercial development that in and of itself does not contribute to the heritage or diminish the heritage value of Hesse Street. In fact, it does nothing but enhance the heritage value of Hesse Street. And in this case, and in the assessment council laws, what we have done is deferred to the borough charter. And the suggestion that new buildings in a heritage context should never actually mimic. They should be of their time, and the building that we have before us this evening is certainly demonstrative of that. So with regard to concerns about parking, a traffic assessment was submitted as part of the application that determines that parking is less of an issue by virtue of the significant areas of parking available within and around Hesse Street, and other specific concerns about the use of the laneway for parking and the ability for safe access and egress for vehicles into and out of that laneway have been addressed in that report. So, councillors, what the planning report is recommending this evening and is that the application be supported, that the application's been assessed against the relevant provisions of the scheme, and councillors, that assessment in detail can be found in the report that you have before you. And it's considered on balance to have planning merit and certainly advances the local and state planning policy objectives. And as a result, the recommendation is that you submit or you approve the recommendation, which is that a notice of decision be issued, subject to the conditions that are modified and found in your report. So if that's, I'm open to any questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Dinah. What I might do is, obviously there will be some discussion. I might see if we have a mover and a seconder first. Councillor Pizzi. Councillor Pizzi, you're on mute. So we might get you to start again.
Well, I'll say all that again. I'm very pleased to be able to move the officer recommendation. I did understand there was going to be a supplementary part of that, but I don't know whether that's arrived yet. But if I could move that, Mayor.
Yeah. I would like to add, if I can, that supplementary addition. If you like, Councillor.
I'm happy for.
Is it? Yeah. So the recommendation put in the officer's report with the following change: condition 1, amended plans include an additional point 1C, which states, C, an amended west elevation plan clearly nominating the reduced level RL of the fascia of the Queenscliff Post Office.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could include that in my motion, please.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that motion? That seconded Councillor Salter. Thank you. Councillor Pizzi, you'd like to speak to your motion?
I will very briefly, thank you, Mayor. I mean, this is obviously a very important decision in this council's life. It's been a complex one for us to consider, and I think the keynote that we are striking in this is the council's persistent desire through this council and in line with the council plan to protect our obviously very important heritage assets in the town, and secondly, to improve the quality of design of buildings, not only within the heritage precincts, but also in the design development precincts. It's been a process that council has informed itself through the work of the Hub Steering Committee and the Hub Project Control Group, but also through public submissions and specialist reports on heritage architect, and a particular report from the government architect in respect to the quality of the built form. As Dinah has pointed out, it boils down to 3 major things that council has considered, and that's the trees in the park, the toilets issue, and the facade. Dinah's made it clear that the issue of the toilets is something that can be pursued separately, and we are all, I think, of the opinion that the approach we now take is to find an alternative to meet the needs, either through a resiting of the toilet or a partial redesign of the building. In respect to the trees, we have been directly assisted by the enthusiasm which members of the public have come forward and sought removal, I'm sorry, not removal, but retention of the trees. And we are happy to write that amendment into this resolution. From my point of view, perhaps the key issue here is the question of the facade in a heritage context. And we have had, I won't say ferocious discussion, but we've had vigorous discussion within the council and within the community on the way to treat that. My view is that this is a great opportunity for council to use the best possible practice in determining that. And Dinah and the team have used what I consider to be the keystone in determining proper conservation, heritage conservation practice, and that is the Borough Charter of ICOMOS, International Council of Monuments and Sites for Australia. The Borough Charter has been developed over 20 or 30, probably more than 30 years now, to provide guidelines to both the profession and to communities such as ours on the best way to deal with heritage projects. In this case, it takes the view that, at its heart, it takes the view of a heritage place. And the heritage place in this case consists of two important buildings from the 19th century and the space between them, and their place in a streetscape. So it's a complex equation to sort out what should happen. The possibilities are, of course, to build a new building in the streetscape on the footpath. That is one option, and that's one option that we have broached in terms of, I suppose, theoretical consideration from the beginning of this project. The next is to try and replicate the adjoining buildings to, in a sense, mimic the late 19th century architecture and materials and so on. And the third is really to build a new building. Well, the Borough Charter is clear that the third option in terms of which way we should go, and that is to create a building that is quite distinct in terms of its presence as a contemporary piece of architecture. And just because the Borough Charter calls for an identifiably new building doesn't mean we need to build a bad building, which sometimes happens and which has sometimes been put to VCAT as justification for a poor piece of architecture. So part of our consideration was to consider whether this piece of architecture that has been put to us is appropriate. And if I can just briefly summarise the approach that's been taken, the architect has taken the view that the best respect that this building can pay to its neighbours, the 19th century buildings, is to withdraw it from the street alignment, and that I think was supported in the very early days of all the participants in this, and to treat it as a backdrop to the park and as a recessive building in relation to its neighbours. Now, that has produced a necessary result. It's fundamentally a building set well back with a recessive approach to the facade. Once that approach is validated and accepted, which we've done, the question is, how should that facade be treated? And you enter the difficulty if you change the architects or within unreasonable or reasonable limits, I suppose, you take on the role of designing the building, you're lessening the likelihood, in a way, of the architect producing a really interesting piece of work. The issue of the facade then has been through advice from a heritage architect. The design has been considered by the government architect. We have argued our own views on how this should be approached. And fundamentally, whilst we I don't think can make everyone happy, and I don't think everyone is necessarily over happy, I think the result that we have before us is not only a very reasonable compromise between all the parties, but a project that actually can excite some excitement when it is delivered. And I think it will turn out, I think it is a very well resolved piece of architectural work. And I think it will provide a new focal point for activity in Hesse Street. I'm quite happy for it to go forward as a 21st century to the interesting streetscape, which is not purely a late 19th century streetscape of Hesse Street, but which is a continuing record of Queenscliff's heritage over probably since the 1860s to the current day. And we shouldn't be ashamed. We shouldn't be ashamed if it is well resolved, if it's well designed, if it's interesting, and if it performs its purpose as part of our current community. So I'm very happy to move the motion. I do see in the recommendation that there remains some capacity to review plans, not to review plans, but to provide detailed supervision of the plans as they evolve. So with that, thank you, Mayor, for...
My pleasure. Thank you, Councillor Pizzi. I think Councillor Salter, you second the motion.
I did.
Would you like to speak to the motion?
I would indeed.
Thank you. Away you go.
So in seconding this motion, I would like to draw attention to the fact that tonight, I guess we're concentrating a little bit on the things that people found some conflict with about this building. But at the planning review last week, when we asked people what they liked, it was clear that there is much that people like about this building, especially inside. It is a piece of art that is being put in Hesse Street. And while I understand not everyone will be happy about the facade, most people will be happy about the trees. I'm hoping people are going to love having a slightly greener aspect in the front of it. And what we are hoping to do is insert a 21st century artistic building into Hesse Street, and may all who sail in her enjoy her very much. So I'm very pleased to second this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Salter. Councillor Minty, would you like to make any statement?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I would. In reviewing the in not only the process but the history of the particular site, I looked at the site and said, are we replacing a building and what was there before? And basically, we're not really replacing a building because before the development of the museum in 1974, there really was nothing apart from a very nice garden within that section of Hesse Street that joins the two beautiful buildings that are there, the post office and of course the library. And I think given the statements by those who have done the assessments of Hesse Street, that it is and history of Hesse Street is of different styles of architecture. You have opposite these buildings the View Grand Hotel, which is a beautiful building that has been subject to change because of fire and other issues, but also the many timber buildings on the other side that have almost a with verandas reaching to the curb and so on. So they're quite a different building. So really what was to go in here was to something that was really to use the ground and to join the two wonderful buildings either side of it. Now, as Councillor Pizzi said, I mean, the building could have come to the front of the allotment and then we would have lost Field Park altogether, which would have, I believe, in touching the community's thinking on this, would have been totally unacceptable. So really we were faced with, obviously, the design of building that is to the rear of the block and which was to disappear, as it were, or to certainly not to be conspicuous and allow the other two buildings to stand on their merits in Hesse Street. And I think this particular design does that very well. I'm particularly thankful for my colleagues and the submissions by the community and the community organisations about the trees to be retained and, of course, the need for public amenity outside of normal hours, and amenity during normal hours will be, I think, much cleaner and far more secure for residents and visitors alike during the daytime. Look, for those of us who've travelled, we've seen this type of thing occur, whether you've travelled to the major cities of the world, you know, the thing that is the Cucumber in London, the Shards in London, the Glass Pyramid in Paris, all were controversial. You could look at the Guggenheim Museum, which is now one of the great buildings of the world. It is a modern building that sits quite comfortably within the psyche of the community in which it lives. I think this hopefully will form and be good for purpose to the point where people will embrace it over time, and they will look to councils beyond our own where there is space still in Hesse Street to put up new developments, that this will be somewhat of a yardstick, and the quality that this represents will transfer to any new developments within Hesse Street, and we can then be rightly proud of those buildings as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Minty. Councillor Merriman, would you like
Yes,
to?
thank you, Mayor. I want to speak against the motion. I want to speak against the motion for the following reasons. I do not believe that the new museum building, its concrete exterior, bears any connection to the history and heritage of Hesse Street, and it detracts from the streetscape. I'm very mindful of the community feedback. I support the view that Councillor Solder has said, that the development inside the building is something to behold. But it's the very question of what is facing Hesse Street, the facade, that I'm very much against. The community feedback, which is detailed in the presentation, is very strong on this same point. And before I go on, I want to make it very clear that I very much appreciate the work that the officers have done in presenting all of this material to us. Not only the agenda item itself, but the appendices that go with it. I don't think that we could in any way be other than very, very grateful for the scope of work that's been done and the opportunity this now gives us to make our comments and to view what is actually one of the major projects, most significant projects, certainly in the time that I've been on council. But the community feedback is very strong on a number of points. And it's not just the people that we get comments from on a regular basis, but this is the one project that I've had more people come and talk to me about in my time on council. And obviously it goes to the proposed negative impacts on the heritage streetscape of Hesse Street. The proposal, in many people's views, did not comply with the Queenscliff planning scheme, specifically the selected building material, and the finishes do not enhance the streetscape. The building does not interpret traditional building designs and does not use traditional building materials. Now, I understand that most of the point that goes into our planning scheme goes to, on this point, is residential, but it also goes wider than that in what's in the behold of the people who view this project. And I'm very concerned about that aspect in particular. The structure will jar and distract from the existing streetscape of the View Grand Post Office and Library. I think that's a given. It's going to be so much different. Now, sure, I agree with the point that Councillor Pizzi makes, that you don't mimic one of the late 19th century projects at all. But surely we could have something that is much better than what's been proposed to us in this project. And then when you look clearly, the value of Victoria's only remaining historic tourist town should not be underestimated. And I think this, with due respect to the architect, I don't believe he's captured the village that we live in. I think it's gone completely against where we are and what we should be looking and hoping to get. And seriously, it in no way meets our council plan. And that to me is a key feature of where we've got to, because it does not meet the decisions that we've taken previously about what we believe should be part of our planning and heritage. And for that, we say that we should conserve the borough's significant history, culture and heritage, maintain the borough's unique features and neighbourhood character. And that's part of our council plan. And I believe that this does not meet that plan at all. It goes against it entirely. The material that we've been provided with, certainly if we look at the work that Lovell Chen is July 2020 project under the building design heading, he again makes the point in that report that we've received from him on page 20. He makes the point that new developments should use traditional building materials, including horizontal weatherboard cladding, rendering brickwork, corrugated iron and slate roofs, brick chimneys, timber verandas, doors and window joining and painted finishes. Nothing to do with a concrete face. Nothing to do at all with a concrete face. Sympathetic complement, it should be complement the design, materials and form of other buildings in the streetscape and the neighbourhood. We don't have a concrete wall anywhere in Hesse Street. And please, let's make sure we don't have one. Then we go to the Victorian government architect. And I think there's a number of interesting things in that report, particularly at page 4 of that report, where he says, if the trees are to be retained pending the arborist report, the facade may need a stronger civic presence. That's in the report that we've received from him. And the other point that's made in there, if the trees go away, it makes the whole thing even worse. A more singular approach may be considered to create more legible and reinforce its civic nature. It criticised the whole project on the fact that it doesn't meet the civic nature. And further on, it goes to say, the facade offers potential for further engaging the public. Different visual appearances of the two aspects of the serration could be explored. It again criticises what we've got. And I think to get a report from that body is terribly important in respect to the fact of, do we have something that's right or wrong? And I think the Victorian government architect certainly doesn't support what we've got here on any reading of what's been put. And then if you look further at the report that we have received from the Victorian government architect, the later report of June 2020, further, it says as to heritage on page 4, further resolution is required as to where and how the new insertion meets the existing heritage fabric. I mean, again, it criticises the fact that this particular work does not meet the requirements that they believe should occur. And then further on the next page, the consultation process with the right or the wrong group should be continued, and then it then says a minimum there needs to be 3 stages of engagement with that group, the Watherong, and details what should be done, saying clearly that we haven't done that bit of work, and that worries me so much as where are we going with this particular project. Another part of the report says that we should consider whether the building inside should be 2-storey. Now, whatever we finish up with, we certainly want forever and a day, and it should be looked at on the question of its futuristic and its future use. And again, if we've got experts saying we should consider whether this should be 2-storey or not, I think that needs to be addressed. And again, the investment we're making should ensure that we go that far. For those reasons, and for those sound reasons, and the views strongly expressed by the community, I'm not prepared to vote in favour of this resolution.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Merriman. I've just got a couple of quick questions, if I could. First to you, Dinah. Just in the report, the landscape planner talks about the retention of the red flowering gum. I presume that the agonis isn't mentioned there because the agonis is already retained in the current plan. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mayor Ebbels. The agonis was not nominated for removal as part of the plan.
Okay, thank you. Just also following up, just obviously on page 22, we do talk about the toilet and finding a new toilet in a similar position. I guess I'm maybe to the CEO, just in regard to, obviously we've got a very busy summer season potentially coming to us. We're just wondering when that demolition would take place, and also just in regard to if the motion is passed, in regard to what sort of signage, how do we let our community know, and more importantly also our visitors know, where there are other 24-hour access toilets within the borough, and whether that's been taken into consideration?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, we've been working with the project managers in preparation of the tender documents, and as part of those tender documents, we'll have a requirement there that the existing toilets are not demolished until early February 2021. That'll give us the full or peak season that we normally have through January. So there'll be public toilets available on site till that point. In the meantime, what we will be doing is a communication strategy, which will include both public notices, but also signage, where we'll be able to direct people to the 4 or 5 toilets that are within walking distance of the site. And we're also exploring what's possible down at the tavern, where we'll have the temporary facilities, library, museum, and the toilet facility, and the visitor information facilities down there. So there'll be a few options. We'll certainly make sure that we inform the community about where those options are, and we'll get that up and going in January.
Okay, thank you, Mr. CEO. I'll also add that I'm pleased that council is they have already engaged the Wadawurrung and will continue to engage the Wadawurrung, and also all the tenants within the new hub will also be engaging the Wadawurrung. And I think it's really important that they do that to tell the story. And I note that the CEO of the Geelong Regional Library Corporation mentioned how excited the staff are to be able to provide our community with some new facilities, services and spaces in what is still a historic library building. So certainly from the library's point of view, they're very excited. Obviously the new hub brings a contemporary design that, you know, as Councillor Pizzey said, it's not trying to replicate history, but will sit elegantly in the background, and it's also respectful to its surrounds as well. It's a contemporary design, which has also been endorsed by Level Chen in Appendix A. Also talks about obviously about the design, and it's stating that the proposal is acceptable and respectful from a heritage perspective as well. So I think that's really important that obviously, you know, the architects have taken that into consideration about where it sits within the borough. Councillor Pizzey, you moved the motion, so I'm just wondering, just go back to you in case you had anything to say in regard to what people have mentioned, or you're happy to leave it as is?
I've got to say, I'm delighted with Councillor Merriman's response to this. I think it's perfectly reasonable. It's perfectly justifiable, and it really represents a what I think over the last 4 years has been a I suppose a far more rigorous and informed consideration of really quite difficult heritage issues. Without being too particular, I would draw council's attention to the date of the reports that we've got from Alan Lovell and from the government architect. They are, in the case of the government architect, back in May, and I think the consultant architect actually did take a number of ideas on board, both from council and from that report, in producing the final design. And I think to the extent that Alan Lovell's final report is, as you've identified, is supportive of it, doesn't mean that perfectly respectable opinions can't be put on the other side of the debate. So in essence, I think it's been a very, I was going to say entertaining, I think an interesting, very interesting example in how these difficult issues, and they are difficult and they are down to opinion in a lot of cases, can be dealt with by our council. And I'd certainly like to add my commendation to the staff and to the CEO in particular, and Dana, for preparing excellent documentation for this and for steering in a number of ways the politics of the process in a way that is been without the acrimony that we have seen in the past, and with a very constructive, very constructive approach to all the parts of the debate.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Just one comment, Councillor Merriman, because
yes, very quickly. Can I thank Councillor Pizzey for his kind comment, but can I also point out that the last report that we received from the Victorian Government Architect. It was in July, and it's dated the 10th of July.
Okay, thank you. So councillors, we do have a mover and a seconder. I'll ask for all those in favour.
Can I have a division? I request a division, please.
Yes,
Mayor.
thank you. Yep. All those in favour, and please leave your hand up. So councillor Pizzi is in favour, councillor Salter, councillor Minty, and myself, councillor Ebbels, in favour. Those against?
Councillor Merriman.
Councillor Merriman is voted against. The motion is carried. Thank you very much, everyone concerned. It's been a really good meeting, and all those people watching on Zoom or watching at a later date, thank you very much for taking interest in this very important project. With that note, we will close the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.